Okay, everyone. Looks like we got some people trickling in still, but we can sure go ahead and start. Good afternoon. This is the special meeting of the Turlock Subbasin's two technical advisory committees. I'm just going to go over a couple reminders real quick before we hand off. My name's Herb Smart. I'll be your host, and then I will hand off to the leadership of the two committees. A couple quick reminders here that you see on your screen. These are pretty basic for all of us, but just to be reiterated, please don't put the call on hold. Please mute unless you wish to speak, and unmute yourself when you do wish to speak. If you announce yourself when you speak, it'll sure be helpful for us for record keeping purposes, although you're not required. We have members of the public and members of the technical advisory committees here today, so just be aware of that. Our agenda has a public participation item and use the chat feature, and I'll try and get back with you as quick as possible with any needs, and feel free to chat amongst yourself. And we're recording this meeting, and the meeting materials are available on online right now on turlockgroundwater.org. And I'll just point out that the two materials that are up for the day are a public outreach update presentation, and then the presentation to be given on sustainable management criteria from Todd Groundwater. So with that being said, I will now hand it over to leadership of the two committees. So whichever one wants to jump in, it's all yours.
Thanks, Herb. This is Kevin. Michael, are you going to lead the West Side today?
Yes, I am, Kevin. Sorry, I got a funny voice, but yeah, I'll be leading the West Side today.
Doesn't sound funny to me, but.
So, welcome everybody. I'm Michael Cook with the Turlock Irrigation District. Herb's covered the meeting procedures, and our custom is usually to go around the virtual room and introduce ourselves and see which agency you're with. And primarily for the West Side and East Side Technical Advisory Committees, just to make sure we have a quorum of our members for any potential action items. So starting that, West Side members, maybe start with the Turlock Irrigation District. Who do we have?
Herb Smart is here, Michael.
Okay, wonderful.
Bill Penny is here.
Thanks, Bill. And what about Stanislaus County? Do we have Walt or anything? No, Merced County, Brody, you here?
Yes, you've got Brody here.
Wonderful. Okay, let me run through the cities. City of Modesto. No, from Modesto. City of Ceres.
Karen Morgan.
Karen. City of Turlock. From Turlock. Daenerys CSD. David, you here?
Yeah, I'm here from Dan.
And Michael, did you get me? This is Debbie Risbach with the
Debbie.
CID. I'm not sure if I unmuted properly.
You didn't, but we got you now, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keys CSD. From Keys. Hilmar. Curtis, you on?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Okay, now this is where I start to struggle.
Okay,
He volunteers at this point, and my apologies.
Leandro,
Michael, this is
Oh, Leandro Del. Hi, thank you, Leandro. And who else
Michael,
do we
this
have?
is Allie from Turlock. I'm here.
Hi, Allison. Okay, so we have at least 7 from 1, 2, 4, 5. We have at least 7 jurisdictions, so we have a quorum. So,
Michael, it looks like Walt Ward is signing on too.
okay.
And it looks like East Side has a quorum too, made up of Brody, Walt, myself, and Dennis. Anybody else from the East Side, Turlock, Subbasin, GSA? But I see those 4.
Sounds good. Now, Anybody from the public want to identify themselves? You don't have to, but you're very welcome to. Helps us with our record keeping, helps us with the interactions. If you're very welcome to introduce yourself if you'd like to. Okay, hearing none. So it is 2:05 on Thursday the 10th. I'm officially calling to order the meeting of the West Turlock General, Groundwater Sustainability Agency Technical Advisory Committee. And Kevin, I'm assuming you're calling to order the same for the east side.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to item number 4, public participation. This is time set aside for members of the public to directly address the Technical Advisory Committee on any item of interest to the public within our subject matter and jurisdiction. If you want to speak to an item on the agenda, you're welcome to do it now, but ideally you'd address those comments when the item is on the agenda. So at this time, is anybody would like to address the committee on any item of interest? Any hands up? Well, sorry, Herb.
No, Michael, I'm not seeing any hands up at all. And just to remind everyone, at any point during the meeting, mics are available to be, you guys can self-mute and unmute. So I control that on my end if needed, but for the most part, anytime you wish to participate, it's all in your control.
Okay, wonderful. So hearing no public participation. Oh, we have. Is there anybody? Okay, moving on to item number 5, round 3 grant update. Update on the progress to date and next steps for the groundwater recharge assessment tool, the programmatic EIR, and monitoring wells funded through this grant. And that would be Debbie Lieber's back with the TID.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Hopefully.
Yep,
Great, thanks. So I just have a brief update. It's been a while since I've updated the group on where we are with the round 3 grant. As you recall, we received that grant earlier this year. We have contracted with DWR to facilitate the process, and we have done some of the initial work on contracting with Todd Groundwater to subcontract then with the consultants to help us move through each of the projects that are funded under the round 3 grant, which includes the groundwater recharge assessment tool, or the GRAT, the draft programmatic EIR, and installation of some monitoring wells, both in the east and in the west Turlock Subbasin GSAs. And so we have subcontracted with Todd Groundwater, who has subsequently subcontracted with the team from Sustainable Conservation and Earth Genome to do the work for the GRAT tool. And we have a kickoff meeting planned for September 18th at 2 p.m. We can send out a calendar invite for people who wish to participate. At this point, I'm not sure who all on the TAC wants to participate in that process. And as with all of these things, I need to kind of get an idea of who's going to be attending to figure out how we need to notice the meeting. It is a kickoff for how we're going to be developing the GRAT and talk through, kind of refresh everyone's memory about what the recharge assessment tool is and how it might work. And then it was an idea that I had of perhaps developing a smaller working group to do some of the legwork for pulling together all of the information and what have you for for the tool as we kind of work our way through that, because it might take several meetings and time to do that. And I didn't know if, and I wanted input, I guess, from the TAC on who all wants to participate actively in that process. And if there's a desire for everyone to participate, then that brings us in one direction. But if there's perhaps an idea that a working group could be developed to kind of move that process forward and then report back to the TAC, then that would be useful as well. I just didn't know, I wanted input from the TAC on, what their preference might be with respect to how that process might move forward, and who all wanted to be actively engaged. But it is a commitment if that's kind of the direction you'd like to go in. So I kind of open it up for discussion with respect to that, and then I'll give you an update on the rest of it. Thoughts?
Any other comments from the group? Debbie, my thought is to have a kickoff meeting with the entire joint TAC, and they could understand what the grad is, what it involves, and then most likely I would recommend that like a subgroup get formed, kind of like we have with the public outreach group, that people with the desire and ability to fit into their schedule can go to more frequent meetings on the grad and then report back to the TAC for decision making and updates and that type of thing. But at least initially have a kickoff for the entire joint TAC, just so everybody knows what it is, what it's about, and what it'll do for us, and the amount of work that could be involved as we provide data to the consultant.
Well, that sounds great to me. Where is everyone else? Sorry, I didn't mean to step on anyone else's toes.
That was Kevin, but that's all right. My toes are big. I think it's a good idea, Michael. I think it'd be safest, Debbie, just go ahead and advertise it as a joint TAC meeting in case everybody shows up. And if they don't show up, we could still have the discussion needed to have, I think. But I would definitely be interested in attending. I was playing with the reactions here and just showing my thumbs up to say I want to go if I get it to work again. So if everybody agrees, they could just do a thumbs up rather than opining, and Debbie can see how many people are really interested.
Yeah, Kevin, just to echo your comment, I think advertise it as a joint TAC meeting. There may not be any action items, but it's the safest bet. It'll be like a workshop, and then no action items, maybe an action item at a future TAC to set up some subgroups, whether it's GRAT or the EIR or sustainable management, whatever it is. Anything we can do to keep moving ahead as efficiently as we can to develop the GSP. Obviously, the joint TAC will be the oversight committee. Everything will be reported back to them, and what decisions will be made by the TAC. But to do that kind of day-to-day work, maybe subgroups makes more sense.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. So we'll go ahead and move forward in that manner, unless we hear otherwise. I'm also working with our purchasing department in developing the amendment to the Todd groundwater agreement to facilitate the PEIR. That contracting was authorized by the GSA at their last meeting. And so, so that's the next step. It's not scheduled to begin until later in October. So we have a little bit of time to work through that, but that's in process as well. And so we should be hearing more about that in the coming weeks. And then lastly, there are the monitoring wells. We have contracted with Todd Groundwater to begin the process for the design work for that project. I believe they're planning on subcontracting with Wood Waters, who is one of the sub-consultants for the GSP, and they are working with Todd Groundwater on the monitoring program and some of the other components of the GSP, and so it's a good fit. And so we have done the contracting to enable the technical side of that portion of this project. But I don't think any of that work has been started yet. So we'll have an update on all of that in the coming meetings. What we have left to do contracting on, once we've finished up the PEIR amendment, is working through the process for finding a driller and doing the bid work for all of that, and that will be, I think, a separate process, and there'll be more on that in the coming months. So so that was the update I had, unless there's any questions from the group.
Any questions for Debbie? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Debbie. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Michael,
Yes. That
Michael?
sounds like Milt.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is Milt Treeweiler, Turlock citizen. I just missed getting in for public participation. I do have a couple items I'd like to report on, brief items, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Is it
Milt,
okay?
if no problem, I'm okay. If Kevin's okay, we'll just go back to public participation before we go to item 6. Is that okay with you, Kevin?
That's fine with me. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead then, Milt. Thank you.
Okay. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced that an El Niño climate pattern has developed and is likely to persist through this winter. For California and the Southwest, it can mean less and later rains. However, the NOAA spokesperson said this is not a direct effect because the actual weather depends on multiple factors, but this tips the scale in that direction. So just keep that in mind. Second, climate scientists reported this week that what's happening today, meaning extreme weather events around the world, is exactly what the climate scientists predicted 20 years ago. Today's climate scientists are predicting that what will be happening 20 years from now will make these weather events seem mild, and that's worldwide. And that's what I wanted to report. Sorry, I missed the first time.
No problem, Milt. Thank you very much. Okay, any other public comment? I did go back to that. Okay, so hearing none, moving on to item 6, adverse impacts to wells and potential for undesirable results. Ms. Stanton with Todd Groundwater. Go ahead, Phyllis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay, first of all? Okay. And can you see my screen now? Looking for some nodding heads.
Yeah, we
I
can.
see it, Phyllis.
Okay, let's try again. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. It's nice to hear everyone and see everyone again for a continued discussion on sustainable management criteria. We're going to be talking about 2 items today on your agenda. Item 6, which is discussion of the adverse impacts to wells. This is both a quick review and also an update. And then we'll be, during that conversation, we'll be focused primarily on one of the sustainability indicators, the chronic lowering of water levels. But then we're going to pivot into agenda item number 7, which is the undesirable results definition and framework. And that will deal with the 5 sustainability indicators that we have been talking about for several months now. Okay, so let's just get right into it. Some of these are review slides that you've seen before, so we'll move through them a little quicker. What we've covered so far, of course, is talking about the beneficial uses of wells and how that relates back to this sustainability indicator of chronic lowering of water levels is kind of shown here on this diagram, along with my little long-worded explanation that the chronic lowering of water levels indicates a long-term decline over average hydrologic conditions. Even if water levels stabilize or recover during wet periods, chronic really refers to long-lasting. And our beneficial uses that we've discussed in the past are primarily municipal supply and domestic supply, as well as agricultural supply, and the numerous wells that we have in our subbasin in order to access that supply. We've talked about adverse impacts before. We're going to quickly review that along with a couple of additional things that have been added at my request for some input. And think in terms of whether or not those might be indicative of undesirable results, or rather, could they be managed or mitigated going forward? So just moving right into it, here's our long list. We'll go through this very quickly because you've seen this before. So the issue of dry domestic wells, some of these wells are not actually dry. It probably just means that the pump was set at a level in the well that couldn't be sustained with respect to the water levels. And so sometimes you pull suction when there's actually a full screen of water below in the well. Nonetheless, that's what has been used by the counties for these programs. So that's what I'm continuing on with this idea of dry domestic wells. Those have been documented by Stanislaus County, Merced County, and also in the community of Delhi. We also have failed shallow old domestic wells, generally less than 100 feet deep and more than 50 years old, that have been documented again both by Stanislaus and Merced counties. Collapsed casing in a few municipal wells, as documented by Waterford and Hillmar. A lost capacity in municipal wells. One well had to be deepened in Waterford in particular. Some dry landscape irrigation wells reported by the city of Turlock. And then numerous wells that were previously rented by TID for water supply that could no longer be used. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. I have a little bit more information on that item as well. And then the private agricultural well owners that had to curtail back their pumping, especially during this drought of record because domestic well owners that were nearby were having trouble with their wells. We also have some water quality issues. Not all of these were related to lowering of water levels, but the ones that have been reported that might be related to water levels include arsenic in particular, nitrate typically more related to shallower water levels, and/or TDS, and various TAC members have reported back these water quality issues. And then aging wells, of course, are a problem for several of the communities, including Hillmore and Waterford. So just going through quickly first a review of the domestic well issues that we've seen. I showed a map previously, this same exact map of domestic well depths and locations, and you can see the depths are color-coded. These brown and oranges are shallower wells, and then the greens and the blues are the deeper wells. So you can see just in general, all the domestic wells that are shown here generally get deeper as you go toward the east, which is a function of both water levels and the geology involved. There are very few shallow domestic wells at all in the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. In fact, there are very few domestic wells there in general. Most of the domestic wells, of course, are in the west. And if I impose on top of this, these little X's, these are the mapped failed wells from the counties as reported by both Stanislaus and Merced County. There were about 150 domestic well problems and at 150 locations, which are shown by, again, these X's that you see here. Most of the well failures are sort of concentrated in this area in the northeastern portion of the West Turlock Subbasin GSA. And they coincide with the areas of the largest water level declines in general in the West Turlock Subbasin GSA as well. And we have a little bit more information on those now. TID reported a line of an area of their northeast service area. So I've shown this by just these two red lines here. So it's rather a large swath of the TID service area whereby they actually drew these lines and said, we're not going to rent any wells in this area because they were having so much trouble with the rented wells that they were using for agricultural water supply, primarily due to impacts from neighboring domestic wells. There was a lot of pressure not to pump these rented wells. So as a result of that, TID had to curtail the rented well pumping in that area. That, according to TID, affected its ability to deliver water supply to the agricultural users throughout their entire area. And in addition to that, the private irrigation well owners also had to turn off their pumps sometimes in response to impacted domestic well problems. So it just sort of shows a little bit of the nexus between the domestic well problems and the agricultural well problems that have manifested themselves in the north of the West Turlock Subbasin GSA.
Hey, Phyllis.
Yes.
Mind if I interrupt for a question?
Please.
That was interesting new data you have there. The private irrigation well owners also had to turn off pumps. Could you describe how that might have happened?
Yes, and it's as simple as you might even think. It is a neighbor knocking on the door of another neighbor or somebody calling someone. TID, I think, finds out, and TID, of course, is on this call and can respond much more in detail than I can on this issue. But as I can gather from talking with folks, a lot of the complaints actually came through TID. So
Well,
this resulted from a lot of domestic well owners having trouble and then calling TID and saying, hey, there's a big agricultural well near me, and that's hurting my well.
Well, that's good that they could get the landowners to cooperate. That's in non-regulatory type of way. That's great.
Yeah. There was a lot of management.
Yeah.
And some of this actually has been mitigated. And this is also new and updated information that I wanted to bring back to the TAC. So the first thing to say is congratulations to the city of Turlock. I was very impressed to find out that during this time period, they actually worked with LAFCO and got approval to incorporate some of these county residents that were having trouble with their wells into the city's water system and sewer system, as it turns out. So there was some mitigation that occurred during that time by the city of Turlock. We don't exactly have the full numbers. Everyone managed this as an emergency situation and then essentially moved on. So our record keeping back from 2015 is less than perfect, but it does look like that that both LAFCO and the city worked very cooperatively to mitigate some of these issues. So some of these domestic wells that had failed are now being supplied, the residents are actually being supplied by the city. In addition, there were a lot of new wells drilled. We just went through the data and got this information. A big shout out to the county of Stanislaus and Walt for helping us with this in Stanislaus County, and for Brody and Amanda and helping us in Merced County. But there's been 248 new domestic well permits that have been filed since the 2015 drought, which actually went into 2016. I never know quite which year to pick when I talk about that. But 248 is a large number. You might recall from my previous slide that there were, during the drought of record, about 150 failed wells that were managed with, or at least assisted to be managed from the city. From the counties. So,
Phyllis,
yes.
Domestic wells.
Yes, domestic wells.
So no irrigation wells. That's
I didn't check on that because I was really focused on whether or not. So, I was faced with 150 failed domestic wells in the Subbasin, and I'm trying to help the TAC members better understand, what issues might happen again and what we could plan for the future. So I only investigated how many new domestic wells had been drilled.
So out of this number and the ones that have failed, how many of the 248 are replacing the failed wells, and does that matter?
Yeah, so number one, I don't know a 1-for-1 ratio. The records are all paper, and it's very difficult to really match all of this back to the information. But I do know where they occurred generally, and I can tell you that the numbers look like they match pretty well. For example, and I know that I'm saying this out of turn just because you're asking the question, Karen, but I'll just tell you in the area generally referred to as Ceres, there were about 45 new wells. So we know that for sure. Not counting those wells, but just focused on the other areas that are in this sort of red box. The area of Turlock being the most. About 75% of those 248 new wells drilled were in this area, which makes sense. I mean, it seems to match up really well to me that the areas where the new domestic wells were drilled were also the areas that we had most of the failures.
Okay. And then one more question. You said that a well in Waterford had to be drilled deeper. Was that on the Hickman side of the river? And was it one of the two domestic wells that or city wells that you're talking about?
Yes to the first question, and I don't know the answer to the second question. When we've had 3 discussions on this so far, and this one particular one with respect to the well that was deepened was what we talked about back in February. My notes said Waterford, and then it said across the river, so I'm assuming that means Hickman.
Okay, because I know the 2 wells in Hickman, for the town of Hickman, I operated, and they've never been deepened. That's the only reason why I'm asking.
Okay.
I know one of them was worked on and jetted, but it wasn't necessarily deepened. Sorry, stickler for accuracy.
No, I appreciate the sticklers. I don't want to get anything wrong. I'm going to incorporate some of this information into the GSP. So I've made a note on that, and I'd like for you and me to work offline and see if we can figure out if it was a well that was in Waterford instead. Thank you. Appreciate the input, you guys. Okay, let's keep talking about the mitigations that we have seen here. So also I know that this group has talked before about the failed wells in Delhi that were documented specifically by the Merced County folks and their trucked water program. Those are these 8 to 10 little X's that you see. If you can see I don't know who's watching my cursor, maybe not everyone, but it's in the Delhi portion, of course, along 99 in the southern portion of the West Turlock Subbasin GSA. And we worked with, again, Merced County to find out what had happened with respect to these 10 wells. And here we do have one-to-one correlation. You know, there were so many failed wells in Stanislaus, it went up into the Modesto Subbasin and then across the river. And it was very difficult to do a one-to-one comparison of was the new well drilled replacing one of the failed wells. But we do know that for sure in Merced County. We actually went through all 10 of them. And so 8 of the 10 wells have been replaced. There was one additional permit that was sort of pending. We think that's expired. So maybe 2 of those wells didn't get replaced, but 8 of them did, that we can confirm that. So I think this is a positive. Yes.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I was just wondering if there was a way of evaluating the county data, and maybe it's something that the county has information on, but would have to kind of sift through to see if it is truly that the new well permit since 2015 are, replacement wells for those that had failed, or if they're new wells in different locations. I don't know if that information comes with the permit and it would just, take some time to do, or is it something we look into maybe?
It's something that I'd be happy to ask the county. It's certainly, I mean, going through 248 pieces of paper is not a small task. And trying to match that back up, I don't think that the county felt that that record keeping was necessary, and so I'm not 100% sure that the data exists. I could go back. I can tell you this, if we're going to rely just on permit information, sometimes people will not, I mean, whether they check a replacement well or a new well, I don't know that I would trust the information that much. But Debbie, I'm glad to ask. So I will.
The reason I'm asking is just that this human right to water and the impacts to domestic wells and that sort of thing is becoming a bigger issue up and down the state. And so when understanding kind of the situation that we have might be helpful in kind of understanding how that relates to our undesirable results and what have you.
Okay.
Well, it's like, this is Karen. I think for me, I'm just curious how many people just completely gave up and abandoned the property altogether. And then how many people bought property and installed a new well.
That would be hard to get at.
Right. But I mean, that would be on whether the well was replaced or left abandoned.
Yes, if they filled out the proper destroy the well permits,
Right.
and it really happened. I will just say this, for all of these numbers, the numbers are large. We're talking about, as you can see, hundreds, and most of this is not electronic. So it's not straightforward to do. And you can spend 45 minutes on one because the address is weird or the owner is somewhere else, or you can go on and on about the details of that. So I'm not whining. I'm just saying that these are not really easy questions to get at. I do think it's reasonable to assume that most of these new domestic well permits occurred because of the failed wells. I think that's a generally reasonable assumption. I'm not saying I know.
Right. And like I said, it's more just out of curiosity. I don't know how important that is to the efforts here.
Well, it becomes important because of whether or not there is the potential to have a repeat, so to speak, of the failed wells that we had during the 2015. So one of the things that we've all recognized, and I think even Milt pointed it out in his situation, is that we're working at a lower level already. We had quite a bit of a decline during the drought of record, and as a result of that, we're sort of not working within maybe the same range of water levels that we've been working with in the past. So it becomes important as to how we set minimum thresholds and how we begin to operate the basin. And I have a couple of slides that speak a little bit to that, not exactly to that, but it can at least inform the discussion, I think, a bit. Before we do that, I'd like to just quickly get through the management actions list. And Karen did the exact thing that I'm hoping people will do, which is read the list and say, that doesn't sound like what I thought I said, because I try to capture this as best I can. So if people have comments on this, please interrupt me. But here we are, we have new or replacement or deepening wells. I added the domestic wells to this list because that seems to be certainly something that we think has occurred with respect to the permits. The Merced County Truck Water Program was a mitigation process. Stanislaus County not only provided water tanks, but some financial incentives for deepening some of the domestic wells. So the county's really stepped up during the drought of record, as did the city of Turlock. A big shout out to the city for going to LAFCO, seeing what they could do, ultimately trying to get some of these domestic wells into a reliable municipal water supply system would be helpful with respect to management of those wells. I'm not trying to take anybody's well away from them. I understand people have a domestic well for a variety of reasons, but I do think it was a helpful thing for the Subbasin that the city of Turlock worked with LAFCO during the drought of record. And then the city of Modesto has done a lot of work to redistribute pumping and to rework their well fields so that they have more flexibility internally in order to improve their water quality situation. And then this was the limited district pumping for agricultural supply that TID had spoke about. And I just put in parentheses there that it was difficult to manage. I know from working with the TID folks on the details of this, they continue to emphasize that this was not easy to get water to everyone when you have a large swath of your area that you can't use conjunctively with groundwater. So we've covered so far. We're pretty much to the halfway mark with this and the next slide, FYI, just to keep everybody informed of where we are in the process. So for the selection of minimum thresholds, I think that I continue to hear that there's a need to balance beneficial uses of wells with the declining water levels that we're seeing in the basin. Clearly, everyone is for protection of beneficial uses for the water supply wells, both municipal and domestic and agricultural supply. But to allow for some lowering of water levels during drought conditions, that's going to happen anyway, and we need to manage and plan for that. And then optimizing conjunctive use is a way to allow for water levels to remain high during times when surface water is available, so that when the times when it's not available and we need to rely more on the groundwater basin, we're not pulling water levels down so far that we're creating new historic lows all the time. It's just not where we want to go. If we've been able to mitigate the domestic water well situation to date, then that's great. We don't want to continue to cause new problems for the future. So as a result, you know, obviously from a technical standpoint, I think from a managerial standpoint, everyone would like to manage, mitigate, and select NTs to avoid problems for the water supply wells, including the domestic well problems, the municipal well field impacts, water quality impacts. And then I added this as a new factor because I'm going to mention it again when we get to the undesirable results. We want to avoid dewatering the Corcoran clay to avoid the land subsidence issues. I think that's a reasonable, from a technical standpoint, that's a very good mitigation measure. I think one of the things that we've all taught ourselves when we did the research and provided the TM on land subsidence is that the Corcoran clay has been the primary driver of the most significant land subsidence problems in the Central Valley. And we've maintained high water levels in the past in that area. And that's a good congratulations to the Turlock Subbasin, but it's also something to just at least pay attention to for potential future problems.
So Phyllis, I had a
Yes.
question on that.
Please.
This is Debbie. So is it strictly maintaining water levels above the Corcoran clay, or is it maintaining water levels where they have in the past? Because if you lower them down, you still have the potential for subsidence, even if the water levels are still above the Corcoran clay.
Right. So it's a very good point, and I think it's something from a managerial standpoint to consider. So number one, there's no technical person on the planet, including me, that can tell you whether or not the clay stringers that are either above or below the Corcoran clay could also create land subsidence. The thing that we look for in the subsurface is continuity and general thickness. So, so that is something else that could occur. With respect to keeping water levels where they were in the past, that's an excellent way to mitigate it. You have a lot higher confidence that you are avoiding any potential for it to occur. I was thinking more along the lines, since we have lowered water levels in some areas close to the top of the Corcoran clay without any impacts to date, that in some ways that might be one in the same, if that makes sense. Did I answer your question? Or did I talk all the way around it?
I think you answered it. But that there is still potential, and it's something that we should think through. Because I do think that there is. It's not clearly just the Corcoran clay. It has to do with so there is potential for subsidence, even if we lower groundwater levels. And so I don't know the answer. Just trying to clarify.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There's that potential. And that's part of the reason that I think when we were talking about the land subsidence issue, we also talked about the possibility of looking at some screening tools on an ongoing basis as part of the monitoring program, for example. So we might be able to set our minimum thresholds close to the Corcoran clay, and then through screening and some other benchmarks that we might want to pick up monitoring that others have already begun to monitor, make sure that we are being careful as we go. And there's a variety of sort of options within that toolbox as well. So thank you for thinking it through. There's plenty of things that I think we could do. Does the screening idea make sense to you, Debbie? Does that feel like something that would be helpful, or would there still be concerns with that?
I think that makes sense. I was thinking, but I don't know. Well, let's wait until we get to some of that, and then we can talk a little bit about it.
Okay, that sounds great. That sounds great. But thanks for thinking about it, because it's something we want to think.
Phyllis, this is Milt, and I do have a question. The Turlock East and West subbasins on average have produced a 65,000 acre-foot negative result on the subbasin on an annual basis on average.
That's right.
Is that still the case? And when will we know what the average negative was for this year? Is that a year-to-year, January to December figure, or when is that determined?
So number one, it's not a January to December. We work on water year because we're much more interested in the rainfall pattern. So we work from October 1st through September 30th every year. And so
what was the latest figure? Did it come close to the 65,000?
Yeah, I don't have that. That number comes from average hydrologic conditions, which were evaluated in the historical period. And so what's happening right now, Milt, is that we are putting together what we've been calling this future projected water budget. And the future projected water budget is what we're going to rely on with respect to our ongoing future water supply and demand. And that will include an estimate for 2016 going forward. And it won't exactly be 2016 conditions. The 65,000 acre feet a year needed to come from a larger data set than just 1 year, because from year to year, of course, that number fluctuates. But what we were trying to do from a technical perspective is to get an average hydrologic conditional period so that we could simply divide by the number of years for the total decline in storage and come up with an average annual number. This sort of helps us get into the ballpark with respect to what we need to pull the basin into balance. And that's the number that I keep throwing around, mainly because we don't have the projected water budget number yet. Throwing around is a bit facetious, but it's a working number for now. And in fact, if we can simply just pop to the next slide, you can see that I'm talking about that. And it's certainly a consideration for the minimum threshold. So I have exact amount to be determined, because the target that we have, of course, is the future, not the past. And things are changing in the subbasin, things are different now. And so we want to sort of project out our water supply and demand situation rather than rely on what has already occurred. But we know that right now, we know that about 65,000 acre feet a year, we don't know the exact amount, will be needed to stabilize water levels. And that's an amount that's going to arrest declines in the subbasin. That's not assuming a tremendous amount of recovery in the subbasin. That would be a much more difficult feat to gather. But at this point, this is the number that's sort of the target number with respect to arresting these declines. If we allow to continue to decline significantly, we're going to just increase the deficits. And you just don't want to get yourself kind of dug into a hole where it's just so hard to get out. Right now, we have a number that we can focus on and begin to work towards. You just don't want to continue to allow that to build. And we also are going to have to think about the possible impacts to adjacent subbasins. I know that the East and West are working together on the impacts. That's what we've been talking about a lot in this presentation and others. So we'll need to pull in the adjacent subbasins just to work with them and coordinate with them on the process. We are going to need some time, however, even if we had 65,000 acre feet a year today, there's going to be some time needed to work to get that in the ground and to manage and begin to plan exactly how everything might look and work. And as a result of that, we're going to need some time to sort of bring everything back into balance. And SGMA allows for that. SGMA allows there to be 20 years to achieve your sustainability goal. You have to work toward that, and you have to show annual reporting and 5-year estimates showing your progress toward that. But you do have some time to get projects in place, get through the CEQA process, get grants in order. Oh, excuse me, I tend to do that about twice a presentation, don't I? And so as a result of that, we'll need to think about that and plan for that as well. And I've shown this on the graph. We've looked at this several times, but sometimes a picture is helpful. So DWR again envisions this. These dates are not your dates. These dates came from the BMP, where DWR was focused on the critically overdrafted basins that had to put their plan in 2020. And of course, yours isn't due until 2022. But after your submission date, then you have the opportunity to set interim milestones that begins to implement your plan. It shows how your plan is going to be implemented, and it shows how long it's going to take for some of these projects to come online. And during that time period, DWR recognizes that there won't be much you can do should you get into multi-year droughts. So planning for that now is important, and recognizing that would occur and may need to occur going forward. Where you can go below your minimum threshold. Again, you have to plan for it. You have to talk in your plan about how you're going to manage that. But your interim milestones do allow your MTs to be exceeded. And when I say exceeded, I mean dropping below during your 20-year implementation period. You do want to set your minimum threshold sufficiently high to prevent future deficits from increasing substantially, as well as your adverse impacts not to reoccur all over again. And the plan will need to think about how to manage those adverse impacts while we're getting things together to achieve the minimum thresholds. But that's the process, and that's the idea. And we don't have to set interim milestones now, but I want us all to recognize that with respect to setting MTs. I don't want us to be in a position of saying, well, we need our MTs to be much, much lower because it's going to take some time. DWR already envisions that. You want to set your MTs where you've got undesirable results, not where you think you can't possibly achieve it. and then you work with your interim milestones and your projects and management actions to turn things around. So that's the process, and I thought it would be helpful to review that. We're at a stopping place for agenda item number 6. So if anybody has any questions on any of this, comments, discussion, now would be a great time to get comments on anything that you've seen so far.
Any questions from the east side? East Turlock Subbasin GSA, okay.
Phyllis, this is Michael. I have a
Hi, Michael.
question.
Yes.
Hey, it says Sigma last 20 years to achieve sustainability. Is sustainability defined as achieving your management objective, or is the objective something else?
The way that Sigma defines sustainability is that you avoid undesirable results. So they're what you define, they're what the GSAs agree to. It's based on the quantitative assessments of your MTs, minimum thresholds. And that's why you're allowed to exceed your minimum thresholds during the implementation period, because you have 20 years to get to sustainability.
So in this case, management objectives don't really come into play? Because I thought management objectives are kind of your desired future state.
Are you thinking
Or
about
whatever.
measurable objectives?
Sorry, measurable objectives,
Yeah.
my bad.
Okay. Yeah. So you know, my experience so far with the critically overdrafted basin is measurable objective, more your guide. Minimum thresholds is your target. So it's less critical that measurable objectives be set at a really specific number. You're going to change. I mean, in the several GSPs that I've worked on previously, we handled it in a couple of different ways. In Kern, I thought it was important. The managers there really wanted some simple guidelines with respect to how to manage the basin. You know, their attitude was, you know, don't complicate this to the point where it's difficult for us to manage it. And so we ended up taking midpoints from recent highs and the critically lows, the minimum thresholds, and took a midpoint. Said, you know, if you're operating within your range between your recent high and your minimum threshold, then that's the range you want to be operating in. And you know, from a technical standpoint, using a moving average based on average hydrologic conditions would be the best way to find where that is within your operational range. I proposed that to the Kern River GSA. They said, please don't make it that complicated. And we said, okay. So, which I can appreciate. So there are a variety of ways to do it. You can do it as simply as saying, you know what, I can manage, you know, maybe I have fluctuations within a year of, you know, something on the order of 10 feet. Or maybe I see 40 feet in a drought of record, and so I want to be able to know if I'm within 40 feet of my minimum threshold. It really depends on what the range of operational water levels have been in certain areas. In some areas, it's very tight. I mean, in the West, essentially water levels haven't changed very much at all in the western portion of the West Turlock Subbasin GSA. And so, you know, it is up to the GSAs, and the technical team will help, you know, propose some possibilities. But the MO is less critical than the MT. The MO helps you. The MT is Sigma compliance. Does that make sense?
And this is Valerie. I know that you know this, Phyllis, but just to put a very fine point on it. Between the MT and the MO, that's where you should operate. But if you go below an MT, that doesn't automatically mean undesirable results. The whole point of an undesirable result is, to the definition of an undesirable result has to be the quantification of how often or how frequent or to the extent to which you can go below MTs. So, you know, technically your undesirable results should be something like, not violating a minimum threshold 30% of the time. So it has to be a quantification. It has to be related to minimum thresholds. And you have to operate between your minimum thresholds and your measurable objectives, but dipping below doesn't equal sigma violation. At the same time, if you just hover right above your MTs and you never meet any interim milestones and never get to your measurable objectives, my guess is later on, DWR will come in and say, are you really implementing this plan? Because you're not hitting any of your interim milestones. It's not a violation of sigma necessarily, but DWR could definitely say something like, you're not hitting any of these. You're just hovering right above the floor. You're never getting to your measurable objectives. And they may say at some point after the 20 years that that's just, that's not implementing your plan, which is a violation of sigma. So it's a little bit of a guessing game, but that's how the phrases work anyway.
Thank you very much, Valerie. That was an excellent qualification of what I had said, and I appreciate you helping me not say something wrong here. The definition of undesirable result is partially based on the minimum threshold. Minimum threshold is, I think, the key to it, but there is a combination factor, and we're going to talk about that next in the framework discussion. But before we get there, any other comments on MOs or MTs? And Valerie, I will just push a bit there. So you don't have to operate between the MO and the MT. You can certainly operate above the MO.
Yes, that's a good point. Such an aspirationalist.
I actually tend to think of the MO, and I've seen this in a couple of different settings. I tend to think of the MO as sort of, you might be getting close to the MT. And again, in terms of thinking about what you really want to do, you want to operate within your range of reasonable water levels, and that includes what I would say is probably your most recent high and your MT, wherever that is. These are important questions and concepts. Anybody have any other thoughts on any of this?
Phyllis, I think that what you've shown, we've seen 90% of it before. I think it leads nicely into item 7. I think there'll be quite a bit more questions and comments on item 7.
That sounds great. Thank you, Kevin, for moving me along in such a nice way. So let's dive into 7. So quickly, a brief review. We had a undesirable result minimum TM that we had put out in July, modified based on comments in August, and then got some additional comments yesterday. Thank you all very much for your comments. We can incorporate that information into the GSP on sustainable management criteria. I only have 2 slides left, but it's going to take some discussion to get through them, because what I've done here is this. I've taken the working definition that I proposed in the TM for each of the sustainability indicator and summarized that on the top line. And then I've taken the framework definition, which includes the combination criteria that Valerie had mentioned with respect to the percentages of the GSP monitoring wells and the number of consecutive annual, semi-annual monitoring events, and place them on the second line within each one of the sustainability indicators. So I have, as you can see on this first slide, a box around these first 2 items, which relate to chronic lowering of water levels. And we've talked about this the most. I think most people are on board, or at least all of the comments that I've gotten to date have not modified this specifically. So perhaps we're in good shape there with the definition. So before I even go into this, let me just say one thing, and I wanted to say this when I was on the slide in front of this. So let me just bear with me. this is an important point, and that's why I put it in bold. These undesirable results are required to be defined consistently for the entire subbasin. That's why they are broad right now. That's why they are, sort of concepts. The rubber meets the road when we begin to actually quantify minimum thresholds and measurable objectives and interim milestones. But for now, I just want to emphasize that this has to be consistent for the entire subbasin. So we can't be parsing out one area or another to define these. We can do that with respect to some of the details buried in the framework. But the definition of undesirable result needs to be the same for the subbasin. So if that makes sense, we will talk a bit about this. So UR stands for undesirable results, by the way. So again, our working definition for undesirable results for chronic lowering of water levels is significant and unreasonable water level declines, such that the water supply wells are adversely impacted during multi-year droughts in a manner that cannot be readily managed or mitigated. That's why we spent quite a bit of time talking about these adverse impacts and whether or not they can be managed or mitigated. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the definition of undesirable results that's presented here for the chronic lowering of water levels? And or framework, which is speaking to undesirable results will be evidenced by an exceedance of minimum thresholds, which are the minimum water levels to be determined, in however many GSP monitoring wells, and in how many consecutive semi-annual monitoring events. Let's talk about this for a second. So one of the comments that I got from the Eastside Water District, and Kevin, thank you very much for the comments. I agree with many of them. This percentage of GSP monitoring wells, very rightly, Eastside Water District said, well, really, is it the percentage of wells, or is it more that you're thinking about an area of the subbasin? Maybe there's something more to be incorporated here rather than just counting wells, right? And that's absolutely right. I am not assuming that we will have equally spaced monitoring wells throughout the subbasin. Number one, that's probably not needed. Number two, you may want to focus some of the monitoring wells in a certain area. The Corcoran clay surface comes to mind. So however, it is easier to look at a percentage of wells in a certain area if that's more appropriate. So again, thinking back on my current experience where the managers wanted some simplicity that made it easier to manage, sometimes it's a little bit easier to think in terms of that. But please do not think that we are not going to look at a certain area represented by a certain well and whether or not that's appropriate. That will have to be incorporated in some ways back into the monitoring program as well. So, again, there's several bites at the apple. Nobody's being asked to sign on to every single sentence, every single word in the framework, but we do need to begin to agree on, some understanding of how we're going to put this together. So, I didn't incorporate the kind of area comment into this, but I can, in the text of the memorandum, point that out, that was something that we want to pay attention to. And you can remind me as we go through the monitoring program that something may not be appropriate if it's just straight numbers and percentages. Does that make sense, Kevin? I know since that was a comment from you, I just wanted to make sure you understood what I was thinking about.
No, I think it makes sense, and I think it's appropriate the way you're trying to address it. And I agree, we don't want to make it too complicated. But, you know, as you pointed out in previous joint TAC meetings, I mean, if you look at the contours, when we're talking about just water levels now, and then none of the other criteria, if we're just looking at water levels, that, you know, with the arrow diagram that we spent a lot of time talking about, we know where the problems are. So that's why I was looking at that area wise. I'm just not sure how big to make that, to say that it's really undesirable, because, you know, if the entire basin can't get taken down and found not meeting its management objectives, if it's just one area that happens to be 6 townships or 6 sections or whatever the area is going to be. So
Yeah, absolutely, as long as you can manage it.
right. So that's what I'm trying to prevent is if we can't solve the problem in that one area, then, you know, why should the rest of the sub-basin suffer?
Sure.
So,
Okay.
Bill?
Yes,
Okay.
Debbie?
Yeah, this is Debbie. So has I know there's a lot of different ways to approach this, and I love the idea of you know, making it so it's not just, you know, one exceedance and it, you know, we've got an issue, because you know, there could be something weird going on, and you know, you'd rather have the opportunity to address that. But I was wondering, has anyone ever like reached out to DWR with respect to their thoughts with respect to the, you know, this type of a concept for undesirable results, and if, you know, that they kind of say, yeah, it's within, you know, kind of the flexibility of the GSAs to do something like that, particularly with related to the number of consecutive semi-annual monitoring events.
Yeah.
You know, it's that's bringing in a component of like time, for example, into the mix. And I didn't know if there'd been any kind of feedback from DWR and maybe other basins related to that, because I think there have been others that have done something similar.
Yeah, there's only one GSP that I've worked on that's been approved, and that was the alternative plan for the Livermore Valley. Todd Groundwater did that. And in that, we absolutely used numbers of wells and numbers of time. That basin was already a sustainable groundwater basin, and so things were a little bit easier with respect to setting those up in some respects. Another way of looking at it is that sometimes when you haven't hit undesirable results, you don't know what they look like. But nonetheless, this combination of time and numbers is actually memorialized in the DWR BMP on sustainable management criteria. And it's been a while since I have gone through that in detail. And I'm going to, I'm just making a note of this now. I'm going to provide that. It's just a couple of pages, or maybe even less. And it speaks directly to this combination of locations and time. It doesn't give you the guidance that you want. I mean, people, I think, you know, people don't know. No one knows yet exactly what DWR is going to think about how the criteria are set up. But I do know this, and I know this just generally from working with the folks in the GSP group and the Sigma group of DWR. First of all, they're excellent hydrogeologists. The guys that I've worked with in the past, they really know their stuff. And they recognize the challenges and issues associated with a one-time, one exceedance. They also feel very strongly, I know this goes all the way up to top management because they've said this in many, many occasions that I've heard them speak at, especially at the Aqua Groundwater Committee, Debbie, which I know that you've heard as well. They're very committed to local control. So there needs to be a technical justification for what's being done. It can't just be something that's pulled out of the air, and it can't be something like, I just don't have, I just don't want to have to do this, for example. I'm sorry to be making a joke there, but it needs to be technically based, to say that. And I think that if there's technical reasons why this keeps the subbasin out of undesirable results and it can be demonstrated, then I think, generally speaking, that they would be amenable to it. I can't guarantee that. I have no idea for sure, but that's my thought process. I will say this. I think some of the critically overdrafted basins tried to push it, and we'll see how that lands. The DWR is unlikely to fail the plan, but they might come back with questions and comments about, is that, please justify this. Please tell us why this seems reasonable to you. So I think there's a reasonableness component as well as a technical justification that's needed. But with respect to the combination, that's actually in their BMPs.
Okay, thank you. That helps. The other question I had for you is kind of how you saw this working when it says the number of consecutive semi-annual monitoring events. So would that be, how would it be, we would choose like spring or fall, or would it be either one? Or, I mean, how would that work?
Yes, you can. You can do whatever you need to do. I do think that DWR does not want you to go years. I think that's something that's generally been thought about. But you might have, for example, 4 consecutive semi-annual events would be 2 years, and I think that would be that could be reasonable. With respect to depending on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to avoid. Certainly for subsidence, if you try to look at what's going on at a time when the fields are being worked, oftentimes in agricultural areas, the subsidence will look very differently than what's actually happening. So you wouldn't want to necessarily look for subsidence in the fall, for example, or even in the late spring when fields are being planted. It would probably be better to do a early spring event. And that's just 2 examples of what I've used in the past and seen in the past. But yeah, and when I say consecutive, it could be 2 springs, but it could also be 2 years. In other words, 4 consecutive monitoring events, a spring, fall. And I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to give one more quick example. The one GSP that I worked on where we were trying to avoid arsenic, that typically was, at high demand in the summer and in late fall. And therefore we actually, the well field operator said, I can't manage it for longer than a quarter. So we actually did monthly monitoring there, and we said that our undesirable results occurred if the MTs were exceeded for 3 months in a row in spring and fall. So there's an infinite number of ways that you can combine the MT, the number of locations, and the number of consecutive events.
Okay, so what you would envision in the future would be like clarification with respect to that. As we move forward, we would provide more detail on what that would be and how it would work for us. Because you're right, there's numerous ways of getting at that.
I know. I'm just trying to move the ball forward in baby steps while we're hurrying up with the projected water budgets. I'm so sorry for this to be taking this long. But, I think at some point, we need to just say preliminarily, here's what we're picking, and recognize that we're going to have a couple more bites at the apple before it goes into the final plan. it was my experience, even during the critically overdrafted basin, that things changed at least 2 or 3 times during the process.
Sure. Yeah, no, I would agree. I just, the reason I bring it up is because as I read that, I could interpret it a variety of ways, which meant to me that others could as well. And so as we move forward, we're going to need to clarify what we mean there. That's all I was trying to.
Yeah, you mean in terms of a percentage and numbers of events?
Yes, and what the consecutive semi-annual monitoring event meant, you know, how you're interpreting that. So give an example, you know,
Right.
so that it people clearly understand it. Because otherwise, someone could interpret it one way and we're meaning something else, and that could be problematic.
Right.
And Debbie, this is Val. One of the things, I don't know if this is what you're thinking about, but one of the ways you could interpret that is, does the well itself have to have consecutive violations, or is it just the percentage? So for example, if you have a 3 or 4 wells in one area that have 2 in a row, but you need 3 in a row, and then they come out of it because they see they're heading in the wrong direction, but you still have a certain percentage that have a 3rd year violation, does that trigger it? That was not very clear at all. But my point is that, like, does the consecutive part have to be the same well? Or could it be 30% of other wells that have consecutive violations? So there are, I can hear myself not being very clear, but you could read that in various different ways. And if we mean that one well itself has to have consecutive violations in order to trigger part of the percentage, then that is different.
Agreed. And if
it
that's
would be more difficult to trigger. So
agreed. And I think you have to back up and say, you know, after you have your monitoring program in place, you have to back up and you have to say, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to worry about water levels in this one well for this one well area in this one region because it's incredibly sensitive? Or are we thinking more along the lines of the aquifer? And my thought, at least for chronic lowering of water levels, is that we're worried about both. We're worried about the aquifer and we're worried about the locations of certain wells. So I think there's going to be kind of 2 ways of looking at it, depending on where you are.
And some of them, not that we need to further complicate this, I know we need to check things off and do things, but some of the overdrafted basins who've already set these things have begun to realize that wells that have violated their minimum thresholds that they have now reported in their first annual report to DWR, that they have violated minimum thresholds, but they have not, obviously because we're not to the 20 years yet, but also just because they haven't hit, the number hasn't been high enough. For example, if you did 20%, let's say only 20% equals an undesirable result. Let's say only 10% are violating minimum thresholds. The question becomes, what happens then? Is that 10% just accepted? Is there any enforcement mechanism? Do you have to agree to do anything if you are hitting a minimum threshold violation consistently at a well? A lot of the overdrafted basins didn't figure out or haven't thought very much about what does the GSA do in that scenario? Do all the members just sit by and watch you plunge into violating your own Sigma standards? I think the answer is clearly no, but do keep in mind that people are struggling now with, well, what are we doing? It's not an undesirable result because we haven't hit the 20% or whatever percent, but we're seeing minimum threshold violations. So
yes, and I would like to put a shout out to my client, the Kern River GSA, because we wrote their plan and we actually have a 5-step action plan as to exactly what the GSAs are supposed to do whenever a minimum threshold is exceeded, no matter whether or not we have undesirable results or not. So I think there's ways of putting management actions together to anticipate that. And I'm proud to say we anticipated that, and it's occurring, and we're doing it. And so, you know, active management is underway. I'll just say that. So, yeah. Okay. Any other examples or questions or comments on that?
This is Kevin. I would just support Debbie's comments about, you know, trying to achieve some clarity here, because especially with the two items on the top of the page, the groundwater and storage and the declining water levels being based on what the water levels are determined to be semi-annually. You know, doing spring and fall measurements like we always do with CASGEM wells, I think is appropriate to follow that model so that the readings are consistent with what we're reporting under CASGEM. And so it just needs to be clear that that's what we're doing, and that the spring levels are naturally going to be higher than the fall levels, but there's going to be some kind of formulation involved to make this determination.
That sounds great. So semi-annual monitoring is required under SGMA, and there's a spring and fall component to that.
Right.
And water levels are to be reported to DWR on July 1st for the spring measurement and on January 1st for the fall measurement, and also documented in the annual report. And if there are water levels that are taken in between those two measurements, then those are also required in the annual report.
Right, but CASGEM is April and October. So they could be reported in July and January, but I'm saying they should be taken consistent with CASGEM.
You can do that, and if you're already doing that, that's great. You can also determine, so the most important thing I think that you've pointed out is that it's important to take them all at the same time, or at least in some relatively narrow window. But in Kern, we take our spring events February and March, because that's the highest water level. So there's no longer the sort of April whatever that CASGEM had. That's not you can determine the window and the time period that you take your spring and fall, and it should be technically based on where the highest water level is in the basin and when the lowest water level is.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you know, I am assuming, you know, we've talked quite a bit about using the CASGEM wells. That has some real advantages from my view, but that's not required. So we can use whatever wells we want. It's really nice from a technical standpoint if there's a history of water levels, because what is typically happening is that we are looking at minimum thresholds as some relative number associated with a past low level. It might be lower than that, it might be higher than that, it might be that level, but it's nice to know where water levels have fluctuated under what conditions in the past at the location. So a lot of people are drilling new monitoring wells, and that's great, but it does take away your opportunity to predict what the aquifer response has been at that location in the past. Okay, let's go on to this second one because it's related, and I got to tell you, these two are the two that are important. I think that the other ones are important as well. I don't mean to belittle any of them, but if we can, I like that we're spending time on these two. I think that a lot of the other things fall into place after this. That's been my experience in every GSP I've worked on so far, and it looks like the same thing here. So for reduction of groundwater and storage, there have been at least 3 ways that reduction of groundwater and storage have been defined on GSPs that I've personally worked on. And this subbasin is yet another one. So we can talk about what makes sense here. So the way that I originally approached it is that I was using this specific um, uh, sustainability indicator as the one that encompasses overdraft conditions. Merced Subbasin did not do that, and a few other subbasins in our area, Delta Mendota and others, did not do that. And so because I was trying to be a little more consistent with adjacent subbasins, I moved in the direction of what Merced had done. And then I got comments back from the TAC members that that really wasn't appropriate in their minds with respect to how that was handled. And so I've pivoted once again, and then I got more comments back now. So we might need to pivot for a third time. But let me at least get us on the same page. So right now, this reads that significant and unreasonable depletions of total groundwater and storage have not occurred. Now let's stop right there and let me explain myself. This happened in Merced and Delta Mendota, and that was, even though there was some chronic lowering of water levels, the total amount of storage that had been depleted was small relative to the total freshwater storage of the groundwater basin. In the Central Valley, we have big, thick groundwater basins. Our freshwater is relatively deep. We have beautiful aquifers that have a lot of storage in them down to the base of fresh water. So in Merced Subbasin and Delta Mendota, they looked at this as a sort of percentage of the total groundwater and storage. I did not do that in Kern, although others did. The comments that I got back was, well, that's, you know, congratulations, you only have a small percentage depleted, but at the same time, you're triggering results because of storage being, you know, you're triggering problems because of storage being depleted. And as a result of that, really, we think more along the lines of this being tied to the chronic lowering of water levels. And thereby, I began to think, okay, well, that's easy enough. We will simply link the two together. So we will acknowledge, as I think Walt had suggested, if we're going to do this, then we need to memorialize it, what we're doing. We acknowledge that we have not depleted a large percentage of our water supply, but that usable storage might be impacted with the chronic lowering of water levels. And as a result of that, deal more with usable storage. This was actually a suggestion by DWR as well in our DWR meeting. So I pivoted and revised the undesirable results to go toward this concept of usable storage and said, this makes it relatively straightforward with respect to sustainable management criteria, because that means that the first sustainability indicator, chronic lowering of water levels, is now protective of the second. And thereby we can just simply use the sustainable management criteria from above. Debbie? Did someone have a comment? So, that's what I had suggested. And then the comments, Kevin, I think that you spotted yesterday suggested that perhaps it would be better to set your own sustainable management criteria for this sustainability indicator, and not opposed to that. I'm just trying to figure out what we need to do or why. If anybody has any comments on this at all, I'd love to better understand that.
Well, I like what you explained, Phyllis. This is Kevin again. It's just I'm not sure if it's clear that your working definition says that. And so that's all I would ask is, I agree with Walt that, even though it's a small percentage, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. We want to pay attention to it. So that's why we're looking at water levels as an indicator.
Okay.
Again,
okay, good.
But
good.
the undesirable results evidence still needs to be clarified.
I don't disagree with that. I think I probably didn't clarify it very well. I'm going to give it another shot.
Okay.
And you guys will help me with.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure we will.
Anybody else have anything to say about this particular sustainability indicator? Okay. Moving on to I'm either wearing you down or or things are going better than I thought. So
Things are going well, Phyllis. Keep it up.
we're heading down the home stretch. Hang in there. We only have a couple more sustainability indicators to talk about, and we are done. So for degraded water quality, this one is this one seems a little difficult, frankly, even to me, to think through exactly what we need to do here. It's clear from the guidance that DWR provides that you should maximize your efforts by working with all of the other water quality monitoring programs that are in your subbasin. There's very little guidance as to exactly how to talk about an undesirable result. So what I have here is pretty general, that the undesirable results occur when significant and unreasonable impacts to groundwater quality as identified by the constituents of concern of the GSAs. Perhaps so far that sounds to me as if it's at least TDS with respect to deep groundwater, and even perhaps arsenic and TCP and nitrate have also been identified. So depending on which constituent of concern sort of helps the rest of the definition, but the rest of the definition does read that the impacts to groundwater quality identified by those constituents as it affects the reasonable and beneficial use of groundwater and has been caused or exacerbated by GSA projects or management actions. In other words, have we lowered water levels so much that we are now seeing high TDS in certain areas and impacting groundwater quality because of that? Have we lowered water levels in some areas such that we are now pulling from anoxic conditions and have increased arsenic in our wells that we didn't have before? This concept of causation, so to speak, has been incorporated in the GSP since the beginning. It isn't clear to me exactly how DWR will view this as they begin to go through the GSPs, but I know that others have incorporated it in this manner, and so I have mirrored that for this basin. And the concept really comes along to with the effect of the GSAs didn't cause, for example, increased nitrate in certain areas, but they need to manage it. And so it's that kind of concept that that we're sort of looking at here. You don't want to make anything worse. The easiest example, of course, is the PCE plume effect, where everyone talks about you can't pump near a contaminant plume and exacerbate the issue, cause it to enter wells that it wouldn't have otherwise, cause it to spread throughout the aquifer, et cetera. So that's a relatively straightforward and easy example, and that's the example that's in the BMPs and in the regs. But the water quality issue is larger than that. It's clear to me, and so I'm trying to figure out exactly how best to handle it. So that's the definition that I've put forth. And then again, for the framework, I have the undesirable results are to be determined when the minimum threshold for that constituent of concern, and then the regulations actually require that you consider drinking water standards or water quality objectives. So that's why that part is in there. When that is exceeded in a greater than X% of the monitoring locations in X number of monitoring events, that's just a repeat of everything else that we've done. But but then I add this, that the percentage of wells exceeding the MT will be determined by the baseline or the current water quality data. And so what I mean by that, and we'll need to clean this up as we go, but what I mean by that last sentence is this. If you already have, and I'm going to pick on nitrate again, just because I know that you know, we have some nitrate in the subbasin. If you have that in a certain number of wells at a certain number of events, that's a legacy issue that's probably being handled by other best management practices and other things that are already being covered again by other programs, including CV salts and the irrigated land programs, which incorporate best management practices for nitrate. And so, you know, it keeps the GSAs from having to affect something that it would be very difficult for them to affect. I'm not trying to make it a low bar for the GSAs. I'm just saying there needs to be some reasonableness and understanding of what is occurring at the time that the GSAs become the groundwater sustainability agencies and in charge of sustainable groundwater in a basin. May have bumbled my explanation of that. Does anybody have any comments or questions on that?
So, Phyllis?
Yes.
So the how are we? I guess getting back to the whole idea that that we're only responsible for those impacts as a result of implementation of the GSP, right? How are we addressing that under the undesirable results? I mean, so I guess I don't see how we're tying it back to, is it as a result of our implementation or is it a result of something else that we get a higher level? Does that make sense?
I think so. Are you talking about the fact that I kind of added that last phrase, has been caused by or exacerbated by the GSA projects or management actions?
Yeah, how are we tying that in down below? Because down below, it's just an exceeded in greater than an X number of designated monitoring locations for that constituent and consent number of events. We're not bringing it back to, is it related to something we're doing, or is it happening due to something else?
I think that's a good point. I tried to kind of do that with this last sentence, but in some ways I did it more along the lines of on our watch versus caused by us, didn't I? The percentage of wells exceeding the MT will be determined by the baseline water quality data. In other words, it was already here before we began to implement, and therefore not us, but is there something that we're doing that makes it worse? And so you're right, the sentence is more along the lines of, you know, what happened when we were in charge versus what happened, which is caused by us. And I think that needs to be qualified. If I qualified that last sentence, does that make sense? Is that answering your question or addressing your concern?
I think so.
Valerie, I'd be interested in if you had any experience with water quality MTs. Have you seen a variety of ways that others have handled this?
Yeah, it is a hard one because you're right that the GSA, I think everyone agrees that GSAs aren't supposed to step in and be water quality regulators, but it's a sustainability indicator. So what do you do with that? I also agree with Phyllis that there's been this, not only in the regs, but obviously in the MTs that people have developed, there's this causation factor. I have seen people do, and this isn't going to be a very technical explanation, but a kind of two-tier MT, meaning if we see, 20% of our monitoring wells for groundwater quality exceed a threshold, an existing threshold, that will kind of make us look to see if plumes have moved, or make us look to see if we have recharge projects that are causing those exceedances. Now, that makes me nervous, because obviously, people on the other side will say, well, so you get to determine if you're kind of the judge and the jury there. You're determining whether your plan created that. But it's basically saying if you have exceedances of existing water quality issues that didn't exist before, you will look to see whether those exceedances were caused. So it brings in the causation piece by either a recharge project, a plume, increased pumping, things that were allowed or facilitated, or maybe even put in place by the GSP. So that's what I've seen. It can get, certainly this is one of the least artful and most confusing MTs, and frankly, they're longer and wordier because you have to capture that causation issue. But that's what I've seen. I don't know if DWR will be comfortable with it, but I think it's probably the right way to go. I don't think we want to set up an MT that says if you violate these existing water quality thresholds that we're going to come in and do something as a GSA. I think we have to tie it to projects, and then the concept would be, we rethink the project. You don't do recharge. You consider dialing back pumping if it's moving a plume. So I don't think we want to step in and be the water quality regulator, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense, and I actually like this a lot. It spurs an idea that we could also have a two-tier system. It sounds to me as if the first tier is simply a trigger to evaluate what's going on. And
that's right.
Certainly the GSAs would be in a position to do that. And then it could be that from a very positive standpoint, not just trying to say, okay, we've decided we didn't cause that, so we're out. I mean, it could be that the GSAs could use the trigger to see if there was something that, number one, did they cause it? Number two, if they didn't, is there some management that could be assisting that? And that would again fulfill the concept of you didn't make it worse. You didn't exacerbate it. You maybe didn't even cause it, but you also didn't make it worse. So I actually like that. Do others think that would be a reasonable way to go about it? I'd like to try to revise this into a two-tier system and put it out for people to respond to, unless somebody sees a flaw with it now.
Phyllis, this is Michael. I think that makes a lot of sense. Please put something out there and we'll work our way through it again.
That sounds great. Okay, I'm going to give that a shot. Thank you, Valerie. I think that was very helpful.
Sure. Yeah, it's a hard one to tackle.
Yeah, it is. Okay, last slide. Everybody I know is like, please. Land subsidence. So here we have talked about significant, unreasonable, and elastic land subsidence that adversely affects land use. And this is wordy, but I kind of like it, and I put it that way on purpose, so hang in there with me. Or reduces the viability of the use. In other words, it doesn't just mean that there is, a crack in the ground, right? It means that there's some land use that has been the viability of using it is affected. It's not just something that you're not even sure is related to land subsidence. So it sort of, in my mind, that feels to me as if that's what an undesirable result would be, is when something is impacted to the point where the use is impacted. Any comments on that at all?
Have you thought about what what critical infrastructure we might consider? Has it been used elsewhere, or
Yes.
is there an example?
Yes, the list is long. The list is quite long. So, for example, in areas of municipalities, it would include utilities, buried utilities lines. In in areas of infrastructure, areas of transportation, it would include airport runways. There's been huge impacts from land subsidence at Edwards Air Force Base, for example, just as an example. It would include interstate systems, obviously. Caltrans does monitor that, but there would be some reason to make sure that we're looking at that as well. And the list is long. It would include canals. It would include conveyance structures, pipelines, tanks, houses.
So would we be required to monitor all of those?
No.
Okay.
No. So one of the things that you'll be doing is setting up your minimum thresholds and your general monitoring. You'll be using those as surrogates for your technical justifications, that if you successfully monitor these things, then you would anticipate that there would be no critical infrastructure impacts. So that's how those two tie together. If critical infrastructure does not work for this group, there's nothing magic about that. It's not in the regulations. This is a Phyllis phrase. If we don't like it, we don't have to use it if we think it's too confusing. I struggle to define these things, and once I get them defined, I tend to like it because I finally kind of got my arm around it, but it doesn't mean everybody else likes it.
Hey, Phyllis, this is Brody. Quick question. For when we do actually define the critical infrastructure, is that just going to be placed as a footnote, or is that going to be further defined in another section, or how exactly is that mechanism going to work there?
That would be a description in text, probably not more than a paragraph, and probably not a lot more detail than what we've already been talking about here. Although we would make we would take that opportunity to actually look at where we have the Corcoran clay and where we think we have the most potential for subsidence impacts, and see if there are things there that we would also like to define.
In my mind, you can't necessarily like provide a list, because over time it might change, right?
Right.
As things develop and what have you. So, I guess I'm just curious kind of how it all fits together and how we make use of that, and analyze. If somebody comes in, it's like, well, hey, look, I think there's this. It's like, well, we know, is that critical infrastructure? I'm using air quotes, and or not, and how would you process that?
Yeah, if it sets up a definition that is too difficult to define, then we can modify it in some manner. I'm not exactly sure how right now. You can just end the sentence at land use period if you'd like. I was just trying to, I've had so many people come back to me and say, well, what does that mean? Affects land use. What are you talking about? And so I tried to push the thought process forward to, what does that mean? Does that mean a fissure on the land? No, it doesn't. It means a roadway. It means something that is actually changing the viability of whether or not something can be used. And so that was, I might have taken that too far. So if you want to put a period after land use, and and delete the rest of the sentence, we certainly can. If we do that, we're doing pretty much nothing more than restating the regulations.
Well, for me, and I'm just, talking for me, I like the idea of adding some clarification, because land use, if you just left it at that, you're going to have the same issue. Of, well, how are you demonstrating that it is like an impact to land use or not, and what have you. So it's just a matter of working our way through it, I think, unless others have a different view.
Any other comments?
Kevin here, just trying to be helpful. Land use is pretty vague, I agree. But if you just say adversely affects critical current or proposed critical infrastructure, and then use an example, to me that does it.
Okay.
That negatively impacts that future or current critical infrastructure. I think that does it.
Okay. And then as Brody's comment was, how is that in the text? It would be just a description of examples.
Yeah, just
Okay.
like you say, the state or county highways.
Yep. And we'll be able to at least, it doesn't have to be a list that excludes things.
Right.
Again, an example list that would kind of help the reader understand what we were thinking about. And then the framework there was also my idea, that we could begin to look at the elevation of the top of the Corcoran clay, again with a bit of a buffer, as being a way to monitor something that hasn't happened yet. That's always the biggest issue with Sigma, I think, is you don't have any land subsidence, so now what? How do you keep from having land subsidence, and how much is too much, and that kind of thing. So I thought that was a really reasonable way to go about it. I do hear Debbie's comment that doesn't exclude the potential. The way to mitigate the potential for future land subsidence is not to go any lower than you have in those areas. So that would be another way at this. I had trouble with that because of a lack of data. There's almost nothing. I mean, I know from trying to work with Eastside Water District's comments and trying to contour, there's not enough data to even contour. I mean, you end up with 3 little circles. I don't know what to do with that. And so it's very difficult from a technical perspective to try to keep you from going lower than you've gone when I have no idea how low you've gone. It's a bit of a circle there for me. Does that make sense to people why I did that?
Yeah, no, that it does. I guess at one point we were talking about potential INSAR data as one, kind of include, and then kind of verifying that with groundwater level data. I don't know if that's so it would kind of look at whether or not that we think that there's a possibility that there's an issue, and then monitor it, so it'd be a 2-layered kind of an approach, as opposed to just assuming that if you're above the Corcoran clay, you're all good.
Yes. And so perhaps I think your suggestion is incorporate into this framework and this definition the concept that you're also going to be screening.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
So maybe you start with the INSAR and then you add in the water level, rather than assuming that so long as you stay above the core pool, you're all good. It's more like INSAR plus groundwater level data to verify that
Yes,
everything's all good.
yes. That's exactly right. I like that very much. Thanks. Okay, I'll rework. Okay, last one. The surface water depletions, again, sorry to be waiting on the model. So the comment that we had from Eastside Water District was that there's a lot more information just on the river itself than there is using water levels beside the river. So maybe my idea of using water levels as a proxy is, an okay idea, but if you can actually use direct measurements of the river, maybe that's a better way to go about it. And so we can consider that. I added that, consider the gauge or stage data instead of water levels as a proxy. I am not opposed to that at all. There's a variety of ways to go about this. I'm just a little frustrated because we can't really know exactly what we're talking about here until we get a little bit further along in the analysis. But yeah, I'm totally open to that and appreciate the comment. The framework is also very, very generic right now. But we did kind of clarify, and I think we talked about this last time, that I did put 2 consecutive spring monitoring events in. I think that spring is the time to think in terms of the actual runoff, and it might easily be, even before the irrigation season in spring. Debbie, of all of the TAG members, I think you probably have the most expertise in the surface water issues. Is there anything that you want to do to this now? I know it's early and we need to get the surface water depletions from the model, but is there anything that you see that I need to be thinking about now?
Well, no, I do think that there's a need to kind of evaluate what's happening with the groundwater. You can look at the stage data on the river itself as well, but it could very well be that we're just having to release more water. So it's still, I think you have to evaluate both. That's kind of where I was getting at is,
that makes sense.
yeah, I think there's a need to evaluate both.
Okay. Next steps. Everybody is happy. I'm sure it's 4:02. So one of the things that we are, did I not put that in there? Here they are. Projected water budgets happening now. We said September. It's going slowly. Do push the best we can here. Continue the consideration of the preliminary sustainable management criteria in the interim, and then begin projects and management actions in October. I had actually promised to give you a list today. I didn't do it because there was just so much other stuff that we had, and let's do that next time. Begin the management action list, and I'll be able to pull in some examples from others. And that's it for me. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Phyllis. That was pretty useful. And I've been kind of worrying about that for a while. Glad to get through it and get most of it done. So I appreciate that. Thank you for your work and thanks for everyone's participation. Okay, moving on to item number 8, Sigma related updates. I think it's Herb.
Yeah, it's me. Give me a quick second. I have a quick little PowerPoint that I was going to give if I can locate it. Give me a quick second. It's 4 slides.
Phyllis was way quicker than you.
I know. Yeah, I had to give her control, which is weird that she was faster than me, but here we go. Actually, I'm going to go back a couple slides. Okay, quick public outreach update here. I think it's only 4 or 5 slides. Big thing to mention that most or all of you already know is that we have virtual community workshops going on next Wednesday. This is the second of 2 kind of series of summer community workshops going on. And we have one at 11 a.m. on the 16th and one at 5:30 p.m. Register online at turlockgroundwater.org, or you could watch live on our YouTube channel. And the topic is sustainable management criteria. There you see a picture of the flyer that's out. We're working on an agenda. Just to recap, we covered on July 8th some common questions, the GSP process, and some technical tools at the last suite of public workshops. And just to mention, I don't know if I've mentioned it previously, but the summary notes from that workshop and the video, of which you see a screenshot right here on your screen, are available on turlockgroundwater.org. So this just a little bit of a recap on the last workshop we had. We have a stakeholder assessment survey. It's quick, it's 13 questions. It takes maybe 3.5 to 5 minutes, depending on how you respond, to turn in, and we're inviting all stakeholders in the Subbasin to take it. We've had 22 responses thus far, and we're trying to get the word out more. And you see the link down there for where to get to it or how to get to it on SurveyMonkey. Also, it's available, the very top green bar on our website has a link to it as well. We have 22 responses, and next week I'm going to kind of briefly digest and analyze some of the highlights from the responses that we've received at the workshop in a quick little 5-minute segment. And I believe that is it for me, unless there's any questions or comments. There's our social media feeds for people to follow us, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Herb. Any questions for Herb? So if you can make the workshop next week, at least listen into one of the sessions, that'll be good. All right, our next meeting is scheduled for September 24th, 2020. Anything else before we bring this meeting to a close? Okay, I'm old school, so I was asked for a motion for adjournment from the, so on the West Turlock TAC, I have a motion for adjournment.
I'll motion to adjourn. This is Karen from Series.
Now from the series, you have a second.
I will second Leandro Maldonado.
Thank you, Landro from Delhi. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Okay, West Turlock, we're adjourned. I know Kevin had to jump off. Is there anyone from the east side who can adjourn?
Yeah, sure. This is Brody. I'll move to adjourn the east side. Turlock.
Thanks, Brody. I don't think you guys do the second and vote like we do, so that I think for your purposes, you're adjourned.